All right, so guys, this is take two. I did all of these lectures and then I realized the sound wasn't on, so you couldn't hear me. So I have to do them all again. So, yay! All right, so our first chapter for this week is going to be chapter 19, The New Science of Neuroscience. So, this is our sciencey chapter. It's all about the brain and brain development. And we're not going to go into any real details. I don't want this to feel like biology or anything. But we will talk about the parts of the brain that are important to us. And chapters 19, 20, and 21, this is a section of the book that's really a lot of psychology. So I know you're excited about that. So here are the objectives for this chapter, things we'll be going over and talking about. And first off, we've already discussed that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the early to mid 20s. So you can see by the chart here that juveniles, children, teenagers lack the capacity to exercise more reasoning the way adults do, because if you look at the neonatal brain development all the way to age 13 and then all the way up to 22, you can see how the brain starts to become a little more complex as you age. And this just lets you know that when it comes to brain development, the older you get, the more neurons, the more connections you have. So, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Many people, when they think of psychology, they just think of the brain and the mind and how you think. But behavior is also included when it comes to psychology. So, we want to know about how your thinking and your brain impacts the things you do. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about. First off, you've got to know what a neuron is. So if you look at this picture here, that's a picture of a neuron. In your brain, let's go back. In your brain, there are over 100 billion neurons. Neurons are the building blocks of the nervous system, and they perform three basic functions. They receive, carry, and pass on information to other neurons. So we are all able to function on a day-to-day basis because our brain has billions of neurons that work together in order for us to walk, talk, think, sleep, everything that we need to do as humans. So here is the basic structure of a neuron. This is something that I'm going to tell you about, but you don't have to know all of the different parts of the neurons, but it's kind of important to know, especially if you are to take a psychology class later. So our brain is made up of billions of these things. Notice at the one end, there are these tree-like structures. Those are called dendrites. They are what receive information from other cells. And right there at the heart of a dendrite, sort of on the other side, is the cell body or the soma. It's what keeps the neurons healthy so you're able to function and do everything you need to do on a daily basis. So it's kind of like the cleaning agent of each neuron. The long part is called the axon, and that's how messages are passed from the cell body and then connected to other neurons. The part that sort of that fatty part, that encapsulated part along the neuron is called the myelin sheath. It is what helps speeds a neural impulse so that the information gets there at the right time. And so it's not a lag. If you've ever heard of the disorder multiple sclerosis or MS, researchers believe that multiple sclerosis is caused by a deterioration of myelin sheath, meaning that it starts to go away and break down. And people who have MS, I always tell students, think myelin sheath, MS, you can think of that disorder. Many people who have MS, they have really cloudy thinking, and then sometimes they end up in wheelchairs because they just can't walk, or they can't do the things that they used to be able to do because that myelin sheath has gone away, and so now the neural impulses cannot travel and their brain is not able to function the way it should. So a neural impulse, again, is the signal that goes from the soma down the axon and connects to another neuron. And at the end of a neuron, those parts that have buttons on them are the terminal branches, or some people call them terminal buttons, and they're what connects to another neuron and communicates. So the dendrites receive information from other neurons, and that information is sent at lightning speed through the terminal buttons to connect to other neurons, and that's how we're able to function on a daily basis. So in last chapter, we talked about, in the last unit, we talked about intelligence, and you learned that intelligence is not fixed at birth, that you only get 50% of your intelligence from your parents, and you can actually grow your intelligence. Well, the way you do that is by using conscious effort, repeating and practicing things so that your brain will grow new neurons. Growing new neurons is how you improve your intelligence. So in next chapter, we're going to talk a lot more about memory, but the part of memory that's most important for you to know about is long-term memory, because that's how those neurons grow and how they communicate. And that's when you study and focus and process information, you are trying to get the information you've taken in to go to your long-term memory, because it is considered like the hard drive of the human brain. So if you kind of think of your brain like a computer, a place that houses the hard drive of a computer that keeps all of your information, your long-term memory is what keeps all of the information you need to know and that you've learned over time. Neural networks. Okay, so whenever you learn information and you're trying to grow new neurons, those neurons are going to group and pattern together, and they're going to act together as one to process, send, receive, and store information. So when I said earlier that the dendrites take in information that goes through the terminal buttons of another neuron, so you create a neural network that sends those information throughout those neurons so that they get to another neuron. Now, we cannot just create all of these neurons throughout our brain without sometimes getting rid of things that aren't useful for us. And that's where circuit pruning comes in. That is when your brain naturally sort of cleans itself. It keeps the good neurons and it gets rid of the neurons your brain no longer uses or no longer needs. So it just says, hey, this one's not helpful to us anymore. We'll move on to something else. And the last thing we need to talk about when it comes to brain development is brain plasticity. And plasticity is your ability to generate new neurons and new neural networks and shape your brain in the way you want it to be. So if you take a look at this chart or this graph, there are two types of brain plasticity. There's structural plasticity and functional plasticity. So structural plasticity is whenever you go through an experience or you have a memory, you change your brain's physical structure. So learning, going through an experience, or having a memory is going to change the way your brain is shaped to accommodate that new experience and that new memory. And then functional plasticity is how your brain functions and moves when one area has been damaged to an area that is not damaged. So I always tell students to think about, when it comes to functional plasticity, think about somebody who's blind. That means their occipital lobe is not working properly. They can't see. So that area of their brain is damaged. And the temporal lobe, if you've ever noticed somebody who's blind, they may not be able to see well, but they can hear well. And that's because the temporal lobe, another area of the brain that's not damaged, will overcompensate for the area that has the damage. So that is functional plasticity. So our brains are plastic. They have plasticity. We are able to change and adapt our brain in various situations. And those are all the things you need to know about the neuroscience of the brain.